Nigerian students to South African entrepreneurship, and I've already been warned, but in a nice way, by our next speaker, Antoinia Norman, who is the CEO of Branson Center of Entrepreneurship in South Africa, that she will wake us up. So please, a warm applause for Antoinia.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a privilege to be here. And a big shout out to Spark, the team there, and all of you great people. Thanks for having me over. I've got a cup of coffee because I don't drink coffee. I've shared that with Martin and a few of the other colleagues. This is for my team back in South Africa. I've said I'll have my third cup on stage, just to be a little bit different, because we do things very differently at the Virgin Group, and just to be disruptive like that. So this is the third cup of coffee. If I start flinching, at least I would have gotten everyone up if you're nodding off. So how do we evoke entrepreneurial sustainability in an environment like South Africa, and how does it fit in? Why am I here? Well, we've got our own issues too. We've manipulated the news of late, and we've been very provocative in terms of unrest, politically and socially. So I want to share a few notes with you, so please bear with me. Wouldn't it be great if we could build a resilience against the onslaught of man's war against mankind? And I know we're all here talking about the course and how we're wanting to do that. But what about countries like South Africa, where the things we do tend to borderline on off-roading into a fragile state? So as far as I know, more than 1 billion people work and live in countries described as fragile states. And 69 countries worldwide have not reported a terrorist incident, a lot like in South Africa. We have crime, petty crime, big crime, just doesn't get reported. So we've gotten accustomed to exist when we really need to live, and fear trends to pressure against faith and having a sense of belief. That happens quite often. So the Virgin values is to be insatiably curious, and Sir Richard Branson evokes that in everything he does. We also like to smartly disrupt the norm and to challenge the status quo. So I'm going to leave you with a few thoughts and challenge you a little bit at the end of today. South Africa has become an interesting example of a country on a tightrope, as it were. And whilst I know we're not experiencing the fierce fragility and radicalization in other countries, we are progressing steadily towards the trends in the social and political arenas of unrest. We've got university students that are on the uprise and want free education, so they burn down universities. We've got our government that tends to be on the media, and as soon as they talk, the rand gets impacted. And we've got businesses in the middle that are struggling and striving in order to make ends meet and to get by. So how do we move from a survivor state into a thriving state? And South Africa has been the engine hub, or the gateway, for entrepreneurial development and economic well-being in Africa. We know this, but we're not leading by example, and that's the fear and concern that exists in many entrepreneurs. So what do the stats tell us? 70% of businesses fail in the first 12 months, and out of the 30% that's left, 80% are not sustainable in year 2. And out of that percentage that's left, they battle to survive and continue to grow their business because of big business that tends to dominate in most regions. So for us, especially within the Virgin Group and our advocacy, we're wanting to continue to be a driver for change, as we all do here. But we have to start somewhere. And we do know we can't be everything to everybody, so we need to find our spot. Important for us and for me within the Virgin Group is to ask open-ended questions. And those questions can't be simplified by statistics or by media and latest news reports. So I want to ask ourselves today, Do we really understand what's going on within the context of our own regions? To corporates, is it just a tick box because you need to allocate your CSI funding into some sort of hole somewhere? To government, are you only interested in the social well-being and political well-being of the people in your country because of voting time? Before this is what we are going to do, we need to understand the why. And the why tends to borderline on what's in it for me in South Africa. A lot of corruption tends to float and is mystified in decision making. At the Branson Center, part of our core function is to spearhead entrepreneurship. We do that in South Africa and across Africa. And one of the questions I asked when I joined of late was, do we dig deep enough to identify the problems that exist that don't necessarily appear in the media and on reports? Now, although these questions may vary by country and context, I'd like to share them with you. What are major identity or ideologically based social or political cleavages that we're affected by today? Do we understand the fault lines? How are we addressing them? What are the major real perceived political, economic, or cultural group inequalities? How impartial and equitable are institutions and governments for that matter? Can any major institution hold elites accountable for their actions? Are there any mechanisms that can bring different groups together to initiate conversations to settle issues? How diversified or inclusive is the economy, really? And how optimistic are we? And how close are we to the situation? Some of those questions were asked during our time with Richard about three weeks ago in Cape Town, which tends to be a country within South Africa to some. And we realized that 100% human, part of the sustainability goals, is what we need to address. So we answered that by saying, how do we get involved best within South Africa and obviously on a broader context? We've come up with a few suggestions. Build capacity developers, call on big business, initiate locally led conversations and dialogue, much like this, foster a culture of purpose and long-sightedness, the vision, draw on local government, encourage private sector growth, and how and why, define the right priorities in a local nuance and realities, translate decisions on how to focus scarce resources and drive implementation, map out value creation, be clear on what part we play, address unemployment from root cause, boost jobs or skills for that matter, create job readiness, and connect graduates to emerging entrepreneurs. So how do we link the sustainability goals? And I understand that not everyone's in favor of the sustainability goals, but it's a start. We've really taken the work around 100% human. You're right, we're trying very much so, and we call the B team part of the Virgin Group, to foster those into corporate South Africa, bring in entrepreneurship within the youth and employment segments, and then work on the entrepreneurs to boost social entrepreneurship and enterprise and profit-making businesses. So the view on entrepreneurship has to be taken via four points of view or four lenses. The one is, what is the macro issues? And these are just questions we asked ourselves. What are the micro issues? What are the political issues? And what are the local issues? So how do we enable this in order to help entrepreneurs thrive? To be a force of good, what does that mean? How do we mandate ourselves to change business for good? I'd like to share with you just a few options that we considered, and I know it would be relevant to most of you here today. So whilst we're borderlining in South Africa on the fragility of the state, we are 108. We've moved up from 2015 to now by 2.9% or something like that. So we're kind of racing forward progressively. We identify that there are challenges. We know there's government promises. And our interest is in the opportunity that exists and the entrepreneurial gaps. A little bit more about South Africa for those of us that just need to understand a little bit more of the country. We ranked number 52 in terms of entrepreneurial activity in the world. And again, you're going to think, what are you doing there? You know, you seem to be doing fine. We're number 1 in sub-Saharan, yes. But our unemployment ratio is up to 27%. And that's increasing all the time. We're a population of about 59 odd million. And our huge gap is between, whilst we're getting a huge influx of graduates and youth that are going through universities, they don't have the soft skills to migrate progressively into corporate South Africa. So the second option for them is entrepreneurship, which is essentially what we would not like to advocate for. Entrepreneurship is about passion. It's about dreaming. It shouldn't be an option too if you can't get a job really in South Africa. It should be something that you're passionate about and working towards. I listened to Allah's point on, I didn't want to be an entrepreneur, I just wanted to start my own lab sort of thing. That is entrepreneurial, and that's beautiful. And that's what we're wanting to advocate within the youngsters in South Africa. From as little as high school or primary school, what is entrepreneurship? How do we expand the attributes of entrepreneurship, which is to overcome failure, overcome obstacles? Shouldn't we have that even as employees in corporate companies? Would that benefit us? So at the Branson Center, we focus on innovation, creativity, smart disruption, doing things differently quickly, because we know the challenges are we're heavily populated, and as soon as one person has an idea, and if they don't rush with it, someone else is going to run along with it. Access to markets is important for entrepreneurs, especially in areas where there's fragility. How do we help? Access to information. I was at Ghana this year with the Silicon Valley, and President Obama's wrote to the GES. And in Ghana, the access to information, simple information like how do I start a business, is almost non-existent. It becomes difficult. So how do we improve about giving entrepreneurs access to information, access to knowledge and networks, and mentoring and coaching? One of Richard's wow moments he shares is that without a mentor, he wouldn't have gotten this far. And I think entrepreneurship, being one myself, is a very lonely journey. So how do we challenge ourselves as corporates, as agents of change, to do something about that as individuals before we do something about it as a community? How do we foster entrepreneurial growth? By being locally led, relevant, and understanding the dynamics that enable a thrive economy versus a survive economy. And never ever think you're doing enough. I think that's important. Whilst we're here together and we have these lovely conversations, which is very relevant and much needed, as individuals, we should never think we're doing enough. It's our responsibility to dream more. And I say this to the entrepreneurs I work with. You dream, you think, you be, and then you do. And that's very important. So with that in mind, I want to challenge each of us to be the advocacy for changing business for good. And I suppose I can stand here and go on all afternoon, but it starts somewhere. And whilst we're going through disarrays in various regions, we have to come together. We have to challenge the status quo. We have to challenge policy and legislation. We have to work in smaller, locally led groups to do something about entrepreneurship across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinia. I think if you, as Mahmoud Johnson did, Google South Africa, somewhere there will be the word rainbow, the rainbow nation. And I think if we look at the sources or the causes of conflict in many of the countries we're discussing today, and we see representatives of these countries in the audience, conflict very often originates from leaders that don't know how to deal with the rainbow side of their nation, with the diversity in their nation. It's about in and exclusion. people who get access to education, to jobs, and others because of their skin color, because of their religious ethnicities, they can't. Now maybe I have a rosy view of South Africa. Well, I don't, but I mean, I do know that you have experienced how to deal with diversity in your own country. What can we learn from the South African experience when it comes to entrepreneurship and diversity?
What's really great is we're still a democracy, and we've come a long way from going through the barnacles and leaks of apartheid and becoming a democratic nation and people. Pockets of racial conflict still exist, so it's not a clean slate yet. You do get the very rich that has access to education and access to certain privileges, and you do get the very poor, really great community that don't have the same privileges and are not able to go further. How we exist together is that we try to advocate the democracy. We try to build people. We won't tolerate racism. We won't tolerate inequality or anything that goes against being impartial as such. The partiality. So that's how we exist as a nation, and my advice really to be more cohesive and create more diversity is to start with policy. You know, it does start with government. Unfortunately, in our country, corporate doesn't have much of a say. Big business is very quiet. They get dictated to a lot by government, so there is a lot of red tape, a lot of legislation, but being part of local conversations is important.
Because the fantastic team of Spark has given me a quote by you, or your motto: being a leader is not about building your own power, it's about building people. But people sounds very inclusive, but how does your company in South Africa deal with this big question of dealing with diversity then in your own business?
Treating people 100% human, and what does that mean really? You know, how do we get the best out of people by believing in them? Creating an opportunity to fail, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but allowing them to fail, and I say that to my team, fail as many times as you want. It's like a salesperson, get as many no's as you can, because you will get the yes. So the positivity needs to come through, allowing people to share their own vision, being part of the dream. You know, the one thing is everyone showing up for the same reason or the same purpose makes all the difference, I think.
And to conclude, we heard a passionate plea before the lunch break by Mahmoud from Liberia. Please look at the opportunities small and medium enterprises, small and medium businesses give to actually build the resilience of people in a post-conflict situation. While you're representing not some small business, what can be the role of big businesses such as your organization?
That's a fantastic question. What government has done really well in South Africa is that they've encouraged, and I don't like to say force, right? We encourage people. So they've encouraged big business to invest in small business, and you might have heard this before. Part of procurement and supply chain, to bring small business on board, to get involved in terms of supply chain, the value chain process. We're doing that quite a lot. They're actually being quoted. So you would get a triple BE, which is your Black Empowerment Points, a tax benefit, if you have to actually bring small business into your value chain, which I think is fantastic. Because there's a lot of money that corporates are pumping into this project, and we're already seeing such a surge of entrepreneurs that if they're well off, could impact job creation and sustainability and pull through other entrepreneurs.
I can already see a visit from Mahmoud from Liberia coming up to South Africa, but maybe also the other way around, from you to Liberia. Please,
Absolutely.
A warm hand for Antoinia Norma.
Thank you very much.